Some words are said without thinking, tossed out in the middle of a crowded room, wrapped in a laugh, meant to land lightly and be forgotten by the time the next sentence starts. But some words, even the ones said carelessly, carry more weight than the person saying them realizes. And sometimes the person standing right next to them feels every single ounce of it. Before we get into what happened on that Family Feud stage, family, if stories like this one remind you that the people we love deserve to be spoken about with the same care we want for ourselves, hit that like button right now and subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story that stays with you. On a Tuesday in the fall of 2022, a man named Dale Whitmore said 4 words about his wife that he intended as a harmless joke. Steve Harvey heard them, stopped the entire production, and spent the next 15 minutes doing something that nobody in that studio expected. What happened next was not about a game show. It was about what it means to truly value the person standing beside you, and what it costs when you forget. Dale and Patricia Whitmore had been married for 19 years when they came to Family Feud. Dale was 52, a high school football coach from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Family with the broad build and easy authority of a man who had spent 3 decades telling other people what to do and being right often enough that it had become a habit. He was not a cruel man. Family, he was not even an unkind one, but he was the kind of man who had been the loudest voice in every room he had ever entered, and he had stopped noticing that this meant other voices sometimes went unheard. Patricia was 49, as she had spent the better part of 2 decades building a life around the people she loved. 3 children, a husband with a demanding career, family, and an entire extended family that had come to treat her as the person you called when something needed to be handled. She had worked as a pediatric nurse for 16 years before taking a step back when their youngest was born, and she had recently, quietly, without much announcement, returned to nursing school to finish the advanced certification she had put on hold. She had not told many people about it, not because she was ashamed, but because she had learned, over years of marriage to Dale, that her accomplishments tended to become supporting characters in stories that were really about him. She loved him, but she had learned to keep certain things for herself. The Family Feud appearance had been Dale's idea. He had called it a family adventure, had organized the team. Himself, Patricia, their eldest son Marcus 25 and their daughter Keisha 22, with the same efficiency he brought to game day preparation. He had watched strategy clips online. He had quizzed the family at dinner. He arrived at the studio with the energy of a man who had already decided he was going to win. Patricia arrived the way she arrived at most things Dale organized, prepared, good-natured, and quietly resigned to the fact that this would be his show. She had packed snacks for the wait, remembered everyone's ID, and reminded Marcus twice to charge his phone. She was the infrastructure of the day, as she was the infrastructure of most days, family, and she carried out that role with the particular grace of someone who does not require acknowledgement to do their job well. Their children adored both of them in different ways. Marcus had his father's confidence and his mother's warmth, a combination that made him genuinely easy to like. Keisha was sharper, more observant, and had her mother's habit of noticing things nobody else thought to mention. She had been watching her parents her whole life the way perceptive children of long marriages often do, cataloging the small dynamics, understanding more than she was supposed to. Family, keeping her interpretations to herself. What Keisha had noticed over the years was that her father had a habit of diminishing her mother in public without meaning to, not cruelly, not deliberately, but consistently. The way he would interrupt Patricia mid-sentence to get to the point faster, the way he would retell her stories with himself at the center, the way he would wave off her opinions in front of company with a "she worries too much" or a "pet's being dramatic." He never saw it. Patricia had stopped pointing it out. Keisha had filed it away. She had not expected it to surface on a game show. But she would later say that, looking back, she should not have been surprised. Patterns do not take days off. The Whitmore family checked in. Fang met the production team and took their places on the stage. Dale straightened his tie, squared his shoulders, and prepared to win. Patricia smoothed her jacket, checked that everyone had water, fan, and prepared to support whoever needed it. The lights came up. The audience cheered. And for the first 20 minutes everything was fine. The Whitmore family was matched against the Delgado family from Phoenix, 4 brothers and a sister, ranging in age from 28 to 41, family, who played with the seamless coordination of people who had been competing against each other since childhood and had finally found a common opponent. They were fast, funny, and completely intimidated by the cameras. The audience loved them. Dale, predictably, was excellent at the head-to-head podium. He was competitive in the specific way that former athletes are competitive. Not nervous but locked in, as though the stakes were higher than a game show had any right to make them. He won 3 of his 4 individual face-offs and generated exactly the kind of energy that Steve Harvey liked to work with. The 2 of them had an easy rapport from the first exchange. Dale was a guest who made a host job simple. Patricia played 2 rounds and got solid answers in both. She was not flashy, funny, but she was accurate, She read the questions carefully and gave considered responses where her husband gave instinctive ones, and her instincts turned out to be right about as often as his were. Steve noticed her. He gave her a warm smile after second answer landed in the top 3 and said, "She's the quiet weapon on this team." The audience applauded. Patricia smiled and glanced at Dale, who was already studying the scoreboard. Marcus and Keisha played well. The family built a lead through the second round and extended it in the third. They were in good shape heading into the final stretch, and Dale was visibly enjoying himself, telling stories between rounds, working the audience, performing the role of team captain with considerable skill. It was in one of those between round moments that it happened. Steve Harvey had turned to the Whitmore family during a brief production pause, and in the easy conversational way he had of filling those gaps asked Dale a question that was designed to be simple. "All right, coach. You've got your family here. Who's the MVP of this team today?" It was a setup for a compliment. Anyone in the room could see that. The expected answer was a wife, a child, family, a gracious gesture toward the people who had shown up with him. It was the kind of question that gave a man a chance to say something good about someone he loved on national television. Dale grinned. He looked around at his family with the sweeping confidence of a coach surveying his roster. His eyes passed over Patricia. "Honestly," he said, "I'd have to say Marcus." He clapped his son on the shoulder. Marcus looked pleased and slightly uncomfortable at the same time. "Patricia," Dale continued, and he laughed as he said it. "Faye, she's doing her best, but honestly she's not worth much in the fast rounds. Too slow." He laughed again. It was the laugh of a man who expects the room to laugh with him. The audience gave a scattered, uncertain response. Not laughter, not silence, but the ambiguous murmur of a crowd that was not sure how to react. Steve Harvey did not laugh. He had been mid-step, moving toward the podium to set up the next round. He stopped. He turned back toward Dale with the deliberate quality of a man who had made a decision. Patricia was smiling. It was the smile she had been using for years, practiced, pleasant, the smile of a woman who has absorbed this kind of thing in public many times and knows that reacting will only make it worse. Family. But her eyes were doing something different from her mouth. Her eyes had gone to the middle distance, to a point somewhere between the scoreboard and the studio floor, and they had gone there quickly. Family. The way eyes do when they are retreating from something. Keisha had seen it. She was watching her mother with an expression that was very still and very old for her age. Steve Harvey had seen it too. He stood where he was and let a beat of silence pass, not an awkward silence, but a deliberate one, the silence of a man choosing his next words carefully because he understood that they were going to matter. "Hold on," he said, quietly, not to the audience, to Dale. "Family." Dale looked at him with the mildly puzzled expression of a man who did not yet understand that the temperature in the room had changed. "Hold on," Steve said again. I need you to look at your wife for a second." Dale turned to Patricia. Patricia was still smiling, but the smile had gone brittle at the edges. "Now tell me," Steve said, his voice measured and steady, "what you just said about her." And the studio went very, very quiet. Dale opened his mouth and then closed it. He looked at Steve. He looked at Patricia. Something was moving across his face. Not defensiveness, not yet, but the beginning of awareness. The slow, uncomfortable dawning of a man who has just heard himself the way other people hear him. He started. "It was a joke. I know it was a joke," Steve said. He said it without edge. "I make jokes for a living. I know what a joke sounds like." He paused. "Family. I also know what it looks like when a joke lands wrong on the person it's about. And I'm looking at your wife right now, and I need you to look at her too." Dale looked at Patricia. Family. Patricia's smile had faded. She was not angry. She was something quieter than angry, the kind of quiet that comes not from a single wound but from a long accumulation of small ones, each individually survivable, collectively exhausting. She met Dale's eyes and held them. Family. And what passed between them in that moment was something that the cameras caught but could not fully translate. A look that carried 19 years of context. "Patricia," Steve said gently, "I'm going to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me. Not for the show, for yourself." He waited until she looked at him. "Family, is this the first time he said something like that about you in front of other people?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with a calm that was more devastating than any outburst could have been, "No." One word. The audience absorbed it in complete silence. Dale looked like he had been stopped mid-stride. Family. Not wounded, stopped. The way a person looks when something they have been moving past without examining is suddenly placed directly in their path and they are required, for the first time. Family. Steve did not move toward drama. He moved toward the truth. "Dale," he said, "I'm not here to embarrass you. That's not what this is. I'm here because I've been where you are. Family. I know what it looks like to be the loudest person in the room and not realize that the quietest person in the room is the one keeping everything together." He paused. "You called your wife not worth much. In front of your children. In front of 300 people. On national television." Another pause. "I don't think you meant it. but she heard it, family, and I think somewhere in you already know this wasn't the first time she heard something like it. Dale was silent, his jaw was tight. He was not a man accustomed to being corrected, and the particular quality of his stillness said that he was working through several responses and discarding each of them. What he finally said was not what anyone expected. "You're right," he said, quietly, without qualification. "You're right." He turned to face Patricia fully. The coach posture was gone. What was left was something simpler and more exposed, just a man standing in front of his wife. "I do that," he said. "I've always done that. I didn't think about how it sounded because I never had to. You never made me." He stopped. "That wasn't fair to you. None of it was fair to you." Patricia looked at her husband for a long moment. Then she said, "I know you love me, Dale." He said immediately, "I do, that's never been the question." "I know," she said, "but love isn't the same as respect, and I've needed both." Keisha, standing a few feet away, pressed her hand over her mouth. Marcus was very still, looking at his parents with the expression of a son who is understanding something about his childhood that reframes a great many things at once. Steve Harvey stepped back just slightly, to give the moment its space. Then he spoke, not to Dale, not to Patricia, but to the room. "I want every person in this building to understand what just happened here." This man had the courage to hear something hard and say, "You're right," instead of defending himself. That is not easy. Most people cannot do that, and this woman has been graceful in the face of something that would have broken other people. That is not nothing. That is everything. He looked at Dale. "No, you know. The question is what you do with it." He extended his hand to Dale. Dale shook it, firmly, the handshake of a man making a commitment rather than concluding a transaction. Then Steve turned to Patricia and said, with the full warmth that was his signature, "For the record, and I mean this, you have been worth every single thing in this room today. Don't let anybody tell you different, including your husband." He pointed at Dale, "Especially your husband." Faye, starting now. The audience gave a standing ovation that filled the studio and went on long enough that the production team later said it was the longest sustained applause of that entire season. The Whitmore family finished the game. They lost. The Delgado brothers were simply too sharp in the final fast money round, and the margin was decisive. Nobody talked about the score afterward. In the lobby after the taping, it was Patricia who people sought out. Several audience members, women primarily, family, approached her with the particular directness of strangers who have witnessed something private and feel bonded by it. One woman simply said, "Family, thank you for not pretending." Patricia thanked her and meant it. On the drive back to the hotel, the family was quiet for the first several minutes in a way that was different from ordinary quiet. Keisha was the one who broke it. "Dad," she said from the back seat, "I've wanted to Steve something like what Steve said for about 10 years. Dale did not respond immediately. When he did, he said, "I know, baby. I'm sorry you had to be the one watching it all that time." Patricia reached over and took his hand on the center console. He held it the way you hold something you are afraid to drop. The episode aired 4 weeks later. The production team faced a genuine editorial decision about how much of the exchange to include, and they made the choice to air it in full, not because it was dramatic, but because it was true, and truth on a game show was rare enough to be worth protecting. The response, when the episode went out, was unlike anything the show's viewer correspondence team had processed in years. The volume of mail and digital messages was significant. The character of it was more so. Men wrote in that in itself was notable. Finally, men in their 40s and 50s and 60s who said they had watched the clip with their wives and had not been able to look away from Dale's face when the awareness arrived. "That was me," more than one of them wrote. "I saw myself." Several described showing the clip to their wives and asking, afterward, family, whether they had ever made them feel the way Patricia had looked in that moment. The answers, by their own account, had not always been easy to hear. But the conversations that followed had been necessary. Women wrote in with the precision of people who had been waiting for language they did not previously have. The phrase that appeared most consistently across hundreds of separate messages was some variation of, "I didn't know how to explain it until I saw it." The pattern of being loved genuinely but valued carelessly, of being essential to a household and invisible within it, had been difficult to articulate without sounding like a grievance. Watching Patricia gave it form. Steve Harvey addressed the moment on his radio program the following week with characteristic directness. "Here is what I want men to understand," he said. "There is a version of disrespect that never raises its voice. It doesn't call names. It doesn't start arguments. It just quietly, consistently, family chooses other people over the one it claims to love most. In conversation, in praise, in the way it talks about her when she's standing right there. And that version of disrespect is more damaging than the loud kind because it's harder to name and easier to dismiss as a joke." He paused. "Dale Whitmore is not a bad man. I want to be clear about that. He is a man who had a habit he could not see. The difference between men who grow and men who don't is what they do when someone finally makes them see it. For Dale and Patricia, the months after the airing were, by Patricia's description, the most honest stretch of their marriage. Dale had, in the weeks immediately following the taping, asked his wife a question she had not expected. "How long has it been like this?" She had answered him truthfully. The answer had taken a long time to give and a longer time for Dale to sit with, but he had not flinched from it. Family. He had listened the way people listen when they understand that the listening is the point. He had also done some that his son Marcus later described as the most surprising thing he had ever seen his father do. He had called Keisha and asked her the same question. Keisha, who had been cataloging the small dynamics of her parents' marriage since she was a teenager, had answered with the careful honesty of a daughter who loves her father and has finally been given permission to tell him the truth. The conversation lasted over 2 hours. Dale later told Patricia it was one of the hardest things he had done as a parent, not because Keisha had been cruel, but because she had been accurate. Patricia returned to nursing school and completed her advanced certification 8 months after the taping. When she passed her final examination, Dale organized a dinner, not a surprise, because Patricia had told him years ago that she preferred to know things in advance, and at the table, in front of Marcus and Keisha and 3 of Patricia's closest friends, he gave a toast that he had written out by hand on a notacard and practiced twice. He thanked his wife for her patience, for her work, for the 18 years she had held their family together without requiring applause. He said the words, "I see you," in a way that made clear he understood their full weight. Patricia had cried. As Steve Harvey has spoken about the Whitmore exchange in several interviews since the episode aired, and his reflection on it has been consistent. What Dale did, stopping, family, admitting it, saying you're right in front of his children and 300 strangers, that took something real. Family. I've seen men on that stage get a fraction of that kind of pushback and spend the whole time defending themselves. Dale didn't do that, and I think the reason he didn't is that somewhere inside him, family, he'd known for a while, he just hadn't been asked to say it out loud. He pauses when he says this. Sometimes that's all it takes. The right question at the right time, and a man brave enough to answer it honestly. The clip continues to circulate. Family, passed between couples and friends and adult children who recognize something in it that is hard to articulate but immediately familiar. It appears in conversations about respect and love and the particular way that long familiarity can erode the care we take with the people closest to us. Marriage counselors have used it. Teachers. A men's ministry group in Atlanta made it the centerpiece of a 4-week series on how men speak about their wives in public, and what that speech reveals about how they see them in private, and what none of them knew, and what Patricia revealed in a local newspaper interview 6 months after the airing, was that she had almost said nothing on that stage. When Steve asked her whether it was the first time, her first instinct had been to deflect, to smile and say, "Oh, Dale just has that kind of humor," and let the moment pass the way she had let so many moments pass before. "But something stopped me," she said. "I think it was the way Steve asked. He asked like he genuinely needed to know, not for the show, for me. And I couldn't remember the last time someone had asked me something like that and meant it the way he meant it." She was quiet for a moment, so I told the truth. And I'm glad I did, family, because the truth turned out to be the thing that finally opened a door we'd both been walking around for a long time. Dale and Patricia Whitmore are still married. Dale still coaches football. Patricia is now a certified nurse practitioner with her own patient panel. Their children visit often. The dinner table is louder than it used to be, and the laughter is more evenly distributed. Family. Patricia still keeps the note-card from the dinner toast in the drawer of her nightstand. Dale does not know she kept it. She has never told him, and she has decided she does not need to. Some things, she has learned, are worth holding quietly, not as secrets but as private evidence that people can change, that love can grow more careful with age, and that the right words, spoken at the right time, can rearrange everything that came before them. If this story spoke to something in you, if it made you think about the words you use and the person who hears them, please share it. Hit the like button, subscribe to this channel, family, and pass it along to someone who needs to hear it, because sometimes the most important thing we can do for the people we love is simply to make sure they know, without question, that they are worth it.